Hello everyone, welcome back. In today's video, we're going to be discussing possible NHL expansion. I talked about this in September. I was going to talk about it sometime over the next couple of months, and today's the day I'm going to be talking about. I'm going to give you my thoughts on the NHL and possible expansion over the next couple of years coming up right now. Hello everyone, welcome back to another video here at the Internet Hockey Channel. Now, as usual, don't forget to like this video and subscribe down below. We are so close to your subscribers. Thank you for all of your support. I would never be able to do it without you guys, so don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. But I'm going to kick things off today by discussing the NHL expansion stuff. Now, there's been a lot of NHL expansion rumors over the past little while. All of this sort of started last November, which is quite surprising. I was not expecting us to be talking about expansion a year and a half after Seattle entered the league, so that was a little bit of a surprise to me. But the first thing I heard about NHL expansion was Chris Johnston saying that he had an NHL source saying that with all the possible money that the NHL could get from expansion, the revenue that the teams like the Seattle Kraken and Vegas Golden Knights brought after expanding into the league, that he said that it wouldn't be overly shocking if not in the near future, but at some point over the next couple of years, we start talking about expansion. And then things started to get rolling. There was the cryptic tweets from John Buccigross and Kevin Weeks on Twitter saying that Atlanta and Houston were becoming the new NHL cities. Then whenever Kerry Bettman went to address the expansion rumors, like he's done multiple things. I've seen him on the Pat McAfee show. He's addressed different things on the Board of Governors meeting, and he's always said that there's interest. He's even said a couple of times that cities like Houston, Atlanta, Salt Lake, Quebec all have interest in being new teams. He says they're not in expansion mode right now. I wouldn't expect them to be with all the circumstances as of right now. But I do think that they are at least considering it. And after the last Board of Governors meeting in, I think it was September or October, a lot of people were saying that he came as close to saying we're going to get expansion in the future as you could possibly say without saying it. So it sounds like we are going to get expansion. Even Bill Daly's talked about how Atlanta has sort of changed since the past little while. It seems like it's coming. In my opinion, we will have expansion in the next couple of years. Not exactly sure when, and I'll touch on that in this video too, but it definitely does seem like there will be NHL expansion in the not too distant future. So it does sound like over the past year, it's been around over a year, I think, since we started to hear these rumors. This has definitely been a hot topic from around the NHL, and I wouldn't be too shocked if in the next couple of years we heard about more NHL expansion. So at this point in time, I definitely think there's a very likely chance that we do expand. The two biggest arguments, I think, against NHL expansion would be one, a watered down league. Given the fact you'd have more teams, there'd be less players from those teams in the current NHL organization, so maybe have a watered down product. On top of that, we're at 32 teams, which is a pretty good, evenly balanced stuff, and I would have to agree on the second part. I don't think there's systems going to be watered down. Even though there's no expansion coming up, I've done little mock drafts for myself to sort of see what this sort of would look like if there would be a team or two who came into the league over the next couple of years, and the NHL could definitely easily make that work. I mean, there are a ton of fringe NHL players who are now playing in the AHL right now, and I mean, look at what happened with Seattle. Would McCann ever become a 40-goal scorer if Seattle doesn't come into the league? Would Vince Dunn ever become a 60, 70-point defenseman if he's still playing third pair minutes in St. Louis? This expansion stuff has definitely opened up a lot more opportunity for some of these players, and I think even though you might, if you expand too much too fast, then have a watered down market, I think if you had one or two expansion teams every 2, 3, 4, 5 years, you're going to be fine, and I don't think we're going to have a watered down product. So I'm not overly concerned about that. For me, I do think that we have a really good balance of the conferences, the divisions, 8 in each division, 16 on each conference, 8 teams make the playoffs, 8 teams miss the playoffs. I definitely do think there's a lot of balance in the NHL right now, so I would say that's probably the most likely reason why we shouldn't expand. But on top of that, I do think it's coming, and I'm not opposed to expansion. I think that we do have some pretty good balance right now in the NHL with their divisions, the conferences. I do like the sort of balance that we've had, that we didn't have over the past 8-9 years since the NHL changed the standings. But I do think that we could make it work even if we were to expand a couple more times. So it's going to be interesting to see. But I do think we won't have a watered down product if we were to expand again. But I do think that the biggest con for expanding would probably be to temper with the balance of the NHL standings and the conferences. So I can see why a lot of people wouldn't want to do that. And on top of that, adding more teams would make it less likely to make the playoffs and have a less likely chance to win a Stanley Cup. So I can also see that from a fan perspective. But I definitely think there's very likely a chance we see expansion. And personally, I would love to see expansion again. I do like seeing the teams expand, go to new places, get new teams. So personally, I like that. I can definitely see why some other people wouldn't want to expand, but I definitely think it's coming. So it's going to be interesting to see, but it definitely sounds like it's going to be coming. We've heard from a lot of NHL sources that if the expansion fee is going to be happening in the next couple of years, it could be somewhere between maybe like $1 billion and possibly $1.5 billion. Meanwhile, the Golden Knights had to pay $500 million. The Seattle Kraken had to pay $650 million. So I do see the reason why they want to expand. The $1 billion expansion fee will be going to the owners, so it'll definitely help team revenue there. On top of that, even though the players don't get anything as of the expansion stuff from the CBA, I do think that they might try and push for them to get something as well, which is a possibility. But on top of that, I do think that with expansion also comes more jobs. Like I said, McCann never becomes a 40-goal scorer, and Dunn never becomes a 67-point defenseman if they don't go to Seattle. So I definitely think that there's more opportunities for some of these NHL players, and some of these fringe NHL players who are currently AHL right now could possibly be in another team if there was another expansion team. So it'll be interesting to see, but I do think that there's upsides for both the owners, and even though they don't get any money of the expansion fee, for the players too, for the NHL to increase to more teams. So it'll be interesting to see. Now, where could the NHL expand if they were to expand? Now, first, I don't think they're thinking about expansion right now because I think they have a really more worrisome problem in the Arizona Coyotes. The Coyotes were supposed to be getting an arena in Tempe in March. That was supposed to be finalized. The Tempe vote was supposed to give the Arizona Coyotes the finalization they need to be their new NHL arena to remain in Arizona for a very long time to come. But they voted no, which was a very surprising thing. At that point, a lot of people thought that they were going to be relocating right then and there. But it wound up not happening yet. It seems like the NHL is giving Arizona one last shot. So they're looking for a place to stay in Arizona. There's been a lot of talk about Mesa. I think there was some talk in the offseason around training camp about them having a thing that said that they were going to be interested in buying a spot in Mesa. So it seems like it's going to be interesting, but it sounded like Gary Bettman gave them until February. Well, big news, February is only 2 months away, so it seems like we're going to have some sort of a resolution on the Arizona Coyotes, and I think we're not going to be talking about any sort of expansion until the Arizona Coyotes wind up having a permanent home. So I think this sort of goes one of two ways. If the Arizona Coyotes are able to find a place somewhere in Arizona, whether it be Tempe, Scottsdale, maybe somewhere in Glendale, if they are able to find a permanent place in Arizona, or they'll probably have to build it, but if they're able to find a permanent place in Arizona, I think they will stay in Arizona, and I think that'll be a really good thing for all the Arizona Coyotes fans. So definitely, I think there's a very likely possibility, and I think they will try and find something. So at that point in time, if they do find some way, somewhere to build an arena, I don't think the NHL would consider expanding until after shovels are in the ground that's already being constructed, because as we talked about, if they run into any hurdles like we did in Tempe, could sort of fall apart to their plan too. So I wouldn't expect any sort of expansion things until Arizona is done. And if Arizona finds some piece of land, is able to build their arena on it, and they're able to get a permanent home, I think Arizona stays in Arizona, and then we start to talk about expansion rumors. But I think if Arizona is not able to find a place of land to sort of build on, or where they can play for the next number of years, and they're not able to find something, I think the NHL is very likely to step in and sort of relocate the team in February. I think they'll probably let the Arizona Coyotes finish out in Arizona this rest of the year if they're not able to find something in February, and then sometime in the offseason they'll probably relocate them somewhere else. So if that were to happen, they would have to probably relocate to one of those cities, which is one of the most likelier spots for expansion. So I would definitely think that next couple of months will really dictate what's going to happen with expansion. Either one, the Arizona Coyotes find a home, find somewhere where they can build an arena, or where they can play for the next little while. And if they find a secure place, if they're able to start building an arena, then we can talk about expansion. If the Arizona Coyotes can't find a place to stay in Arizona, then I think this is the last season that the Arizona Coyotes play in Arizona, and at some point in time they will be moved in the off season to another location, whether it be Houston, whether it be Salt Lake City, which were some of the team locations relocations that we were talking about. I think there's a very likely chance that then the relocation happens, and then after the relocation, then we can talk about expansion. So I think there's a very likely chance that either one of those two situations, we probably don't hear about very much expansion over the next while, but there's a very likely chance that we're going to expand. So I think it won't happen anytime soon, expansion rumors that is, because of all the situation around Arizona. I'm also trying to get a World Cup of Hockey for 2025 and then go back to the Olympics in 2026. So it'll be interesting to see, but I definitely do think that this is going to be really, really interesting. But I definitely do see the reason why no expansion stuff is going to happen until either Arizona has a permanent home or they're moved somewhere else. So it's going to be interesting to see, but it sounded like Gary Bettman was going to give him no until February, and that's only 2 months away. So we should have some clarity in Arizona over the next couple of months, and when we do have some clarity in Arizona, then we can start worrying about expansion. So what are some of the cities that we could look at to see expansion? I see 4 or 5 cities that could easily get expansion teams in the not too distant future. Now, what do you need for a good expansion team? I've heard some people say this. You need a good owner who's willing to buy the team, like we said, around $1 billion expansion cost. So it's going to take a person with some pretty deep pockets. So you're going to need an owner who's willing to pay a $1 billion expansion fee. You're going to need an NHL arena for a team to play in, and you need a market that's sort of being able to support an NHL team. Now, the first one that comes to mind will be Houston. Houston's a really, really good city. There's been a lot of talk about Houston getting a team. Houston has had hockey before. They used to be a part of the WHA, which had the Oilers, the Nordiques, the Whalers, and the old Jets team, as well as a couple of other ones back in the late 70s. Before they folded, and they wound up giving those 4 teams to the NHL. But the Arrows were a part of that, so the Houston Arrows were a part of that hockey organization. And then also a couple of years ago, the Houston Arrows were also an AHL team. So hockey does work in Houston. If I remember correctly, they're the biggest city in the U.S. who does not have an NHL team. So there's a lot of fans there that could definitely support a team in Houston. They have a natural rivalry with the Dallas Stars. They're a Central Division team. So, like I said, they make a lot of sense for a team like Arizona to relocate, but I also think they make a lot of sense for expansion. There's an owner there, the owner of the Houston Rockets, who's been reportedly interested in bringing a hockey team to Houston. I'm not exactly sure if he'll be the best owner possible, but I do think that's a very likely possibility. So you got a big enough fan base there that could support a team like Houston. It's one of the biggest U.S. markets. We've seen it can support hockey. They got an owner there who seems to be willing to bring in an NHL team. I'm not sure if he'll be willing to pay the $1 billion expansion fee, but it does seem like he'd be willing to bring in an NHL team. And then the Toyota Center, which was the Houston Rockets NHL arena, recently, I think it was last month, said that they were going to be able to put in ice making equipment that's essential for NHL hockey to be played there. So they didn't say it was essential for NHL hockey, but they are putting ice equipment that is able to turn that Toyota Center into a hockey arena. So it definitely does seem like Houston is a very likely option in my opinion. Houston, I think, would be a very fantastic one and the very first option in my opinion if the NHL does decide to expand. So I definitely think Houston is a very likely option. Like I said, big U.S. market, the biggest one that doesn't have an NHL team. The natural rivalry with Dallas, an owner who seems to want to bring an NHL team there, and an NHL-sized arena, which is getting renovations to become ready to have hockey played on it. So it seems like Houston's very much the front runner here. Some other cities that I think could definitely work. One would be Atlanta. Now I know a lot of people say Atlanta should not work. They should not get a third option. A lot of people hated playing in Atlanta, and I get that. And I think that Atlanta has not worked in the past. Maybe it can work now. I'm not exactly sure what caused Atlanta in the 80s to sort of move from Atlanta to Calgary, but I definitely do know why the Atlanta team didn't work out back a couple of years ago. I think it was over a decade now in Atlanta the second time. One, their expansion draft was not overly great. Their team was never a great team to watch on ice. 2, the owners were never really invested in the NHL team. And 3, the arena was not very good. It was not situated well, and it was not the best NHL arena. Even though the attendance was not always at the very, very bottom, Atlanta's arena was just definitely not up to NHL standards. So at this point in time, Atlanta sort of seems to be changing that. It seems like there's an owner group in Atlanta who wants to bring an NHL team there. There's an NHL arena that's being built as of right now. That's sort of being poised to be finished in somewhere around 2026, 2027. So there's really strong interest to have an NHL-ready arena by 26-27, and it does seem like the Atlanta could host an NHL team. They have a big enough fan base, I think, there. The Atlanta Gladiators in the ECHL have definitely thrived. I know it's a completely different league, but I do think there's some possibility that an Atlanta team could work. So I'm not definitely saying they're going to. I'm not saying they should do it, but Bill Daly did specifically mention that Atlanta's a lot different now. I think with the new arena that's being built in a different location that seems to be more suitable for fans, it seems like they have an ownership group looking to bring an NHL team to Atlanta, and it also seems like they have a decent fan base, as shown by the dedication to the ECHL team, the Atlanta Gladiators. I do think there's a possibility that a team could work in Atlanta. Is it going to be a slam dunk? Definitely not. But I do think there's a possibility that if the NHL sees fit, maybe they go back to Atlanta. They are one of the bigger markets too in the U.S. who doesn't have an NHL team, and on top of that, they're one of the places where the U.S. broadcast, if I'm correct, is located. So they would definitely be interested to see a team in Atlanta, and those are two places that a lot of people have been mentioning as sort of like the very likely options to be the 33rd and 34th team in the NHL, Houston and Atlanta. So it'll be interesting to see, but I definitely think those are possibilities. Some of these other ones are maybe not less likely, but do have a little bit more problems with them. For Salt Lake, that's been another one that's been really interested. They have a really good owner possibility in Utah Jazz owner Ryan Smith. We know that he's talked to Gary Bettman a couple of times. We know that he has interest. He's already mentioned trying to bring an NHL team to Utah. So it seems like he has definitely dedicated interest to bring a hockey team to the state of Utah. So definitely think that Utah's an option. So that's a really great owner who could definitely work for the NHL. On top of that, their fan base isn't overly bad. We've seen the NHL go to untraditional hockey markets like Vegas, and Vegas has thrived. I would definitely not say a team in Utah could definitely not thrive. I think it's very more unconventional than a city like Houston or Seattle, but I do think a team in Salt Lake City or Utah could work, and I definitely think there would be a fan base enough there to sort of support an NHL team. And on top of that, they do not have a really great NHL arena, and I think it's called Vivint Arena in Salt Lake. It's not the best NHL arena. It wouldn't be the worst, but it's not the best NHL arena. But there's a lot of speculation that with Utah possibly hosting the 2030 Winter Olympics, that they would be making a new arena that could house an NHL team somewhere around maybe like 2028, 2029. So it seems like Salt Lake could host an NHL team. It would be really interesting. It sounds like their arena's still a couple of years off, but it does sound like you have an owner who's looking to bring a team there. They have a fan base that I think could support an NHL team, and they have an arena that's suitable right now for the NHL, and they could get a major upgrade in the NHL arena category in the next couple of years. So it sort of seems like there's a very likely chance that Salt Lake could be a very good option there too. I definitely think that's a very likely option. Quebec City is another option in my opinion. I know there's been a lot of talk that they will never get an expansion team, and it seems like the NHL doesn't really want to go there right now, but I think eventually the NHL will hear its fans, and I think they will start to look at Quebec as a very more serious option. Now, I think they will go to some of the bigger U.S. markets first, like a Houston, like maybe in Atlanta. I think those ones would be more likely options to be first. But if they were to expand by a couple of teams, maybe 3 or 4, I do think Quebec stands a good chance. I think they're one of the likely eastern side cities to get an NHL team. They have a really good arena in the Videotron Center. Their fan base, would be competing with Montreal a little bit. I think would be a very strong fan base. There's been a ton of people I've seen say that if they were to expand again, Quebec City would be one that everyone seemed to love to come back. Everyone likes to see the Nordiques come back. So I would definitely say that Quebec would have a fan base enough to support a team in Quebec. Maybe it takes a little bit of revenue off of Montreal, which is why the NHL hasn't wanted to do that yet. But I definitely think Quebec would work. I think the Quebec-Montreal rivalry would be a fantastic one. The fan base is there. They have a really good arena. It seems like they could possibly have an owner, maybe. I'm not exactly sure about the owner situation in Quebec, but I do know that the NHL recently gave Quebec a couple of preseason games to play there. I think next year they said LA play 2 games in Quebec City, I think at the Videotron Center. So I think there's a very likely possibility that sort of maybe an indicator to the NHL to see if there's a possibility that maybe Quebec could work there. I know that one of the leaders of the Quebec government has said that the NHL should try and give them an NHL team after they were awarded those 2 preseason games. So I definitely think there's interest by Quebec, both by the government, by the fan base. I think a lot of NHL fans would love to see another team in Quebec. So personally, I would love to see a team in Quebec too. Will it happen? It's interesting to say, but I think if the NHL were to expand to like 35, 36 teams, I think there's a very likely chance that Quebec winds up becoming one of those teams who winds up being added to a possible expansion list. And last possible option would be Kansas City. Now, I think those four options before, Salt Lake, Houston, Atlanta, and Quebec, would be the four most likely options if this NHL were to expand from 32 to 36 teams to put one new team in every division. But I do think there's a possibility that if Arizona were to relocate to a Houston or Salt Lake City, there would have to be one more other city that winds up being considered if they were to expand to 36 teams. And I think that city would be Kansas City. Kansas City has been personally, I think could work. They have an NHL-ready arena in the T-Mobile Center. It's not the best of NHL arenas, but it's definitely one that I think could host an NHL team. I've seen a lot of good fan base there saying that they could possibly work. I even saw Patrick Mahomes when there was a lot of expansion rumors saying that he would love to see an NHL team in KC. So I think that would be a fantastic place for an NHL team. The NHL has worked in KC before. Like we said, it worked in Atlanta twice back when they had the Atlanta Flames in the 1970s, and then the Atlanta Thrashers in the early 2000s. We said that Houston's been the WHA. They also had an AHL affiliate. Utah's never really had an NHL team, but they do play in the ECHL right now. And Quebec did work in the NHL for a couple of years from like the early 80s to the late 90s, but then they relocated. So we know all of those cities could probably work. KC did have an NHL team too. They used to be the KC Scouts before they moved to Colorado, who moved to New Jersey and is now the New Jersey Devils. It was only for, I think, a couple of years, but I do think there's a possibility that KC could work. KC seems like a pretty good fan base. I'm not sure about the owner situation. They'll probably have to find an owner that would be really willing to get the team to KC. But I definitely think KC is a possibility. They have an NHL-ready arena, good fan base. I think if they could find an owner, that would be a fantastic place to expand to. And I think there would be a very, very likely chance that if there was a possible relocation and Houston or Salt Lake City were to get Arizona and the NHL wants to expand to, let's say, 36 teams, I think KC's a team who's probably ahead of some of the other ones as a possible option for expansion. So it'll be interesting to see, but there's also a couple of other cities I could see have expansion teams. If this NHL were to go from, like, let's say 40 in like the next 20, 30 years, if the NHL were to go that high, I'm not exactly saying they will, but if they were to go that high, I think there's a possibility that maybe a Portland comes to mind. I think a Portland could host a team, Pacific Northwest city, that could really work well with a team like Seattle, Vancouver. I think they have a good fan base. I think they have a somewhat NHL arena, and I think they could definitely work there. On top of that, we've heard some people say Sacramento and San Diego. The Sacramento Kings owner was interested in purchasing the Ottawa Senators, but seemed like he was more likely looking to try and sort of see what could possibly happen around possible NHL expansion. San Diego seems, I think if I'm correct, is building an NHL level arena. But in my opinion, I'm not exactly sure if they would want to go to another California team. I think it's a little bit less likely they would go back to California for like a fourth team or possibly a fifth team. So I think it would be less likely as of right now, but I could see Sacramento or San Diego. I've seen some people say Oklahoma City. I've seen some people say Saskatchewan. I've seen some people say Halifax. I've seen some people say Baltimore. I've seen some people say a couple of other cities. I think Milwaukee would be a very good option. They're more of a centralized city. They would have natural rivalries with teams like Minnesota, Chicago, Detroit. So I could definitely see a team in Milwaukee work. So there's definitely a couple of other cities I think could definitely work to bring in an NHL team. But I think as of right now, as we sit here today, the 5 most likely expansion cities would be Houston, Salt Lake, Quebec, Atlanta, and KC. Probably in the order of Houston, Atlanta, Salt Lake City, Quebec, and KC. And I think if the NHL does wind up expanding in the not-too-distant future, those will be the most likely cities that we see. So I definitely think it's going to happen in the not-too-distant future. I think, personally, we're probably going to have an announcement for some sort of NHL expansion probably in the next, I would say, 2 to 3 years. I would definitely see sometime around there. I think once Arizona settled into a new NHL arena, I think the NHL will definitely consider expansion. And just because I think they're announcing in 2 to 3 years, I don't think there's going to be an actual expansion draft in 2 or 3 years. I think just like we saw with Vegas, just like we saw with Seattle, they have to get a year or two to sort of work everything out. So even if we got a word that could expand in like 2 to 3 years, they probably wouldn't have a new NHL expansion team until probably somewhere around 2028, 2029. So it'll be interesting to see, but I think Houston, I think Salt Lake City, I think Atlanta, I think Quebec, and I think KC all stand a very good chance to possibly become the new NHL expansion. And I think in the next 10, 15 years, we could definitely be up to 36 teams in the NHL. So it'll definitely be interesting to see. But I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts on all of this down in the comment section. Do you think we're going to be heading towards an NHL expansion? I think with the expansion fee at $1 billion, with the possibility of more opportunities for some of these lower fringe NHL players on new teams, I think there's a very likely chance we do see an NHL expansion. I know it sort of messes with the continuity of the conferences and the evenness of the conferences, but I definitely do think there's going to be NHL expansion. So if there's NHL expansion and we do go to 34, 36 teams in the next 10, 15, 20 years, where do you think would be the best fit for the NHL expansion? It's possible that the NHL winds up expanding. Personally, I think if they were to expand, they'll probably do 2 within close proximity and then 2 again afterwards. If the NHL does relocate to Salt Lake City or Houston, the team who doesn't get the Arizona Coyotes would expand, as well as Atlanta, and then after that KC and Quebec could possibly be the next teams. If there was no NHL relocation and the Coyotes stay in Arizona, then I think there's a very likely possibility that Houston and Atlanta wind up expanding to becoming the 33rd and 34th team, and then a couple of years after that, then maybe cities like Salt Lake City and Quebec wind up becoming like the 35th and 36th franchise. So I definitely think it'll be interesting, but those are the sort of expansion things I personally think will happen in the not distant future. But I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts. Is KC a possibility? Is Houston a possibility? Is Salt Lake a possibility? Atlanta? Quebec? Do you think there's another opportunity for another city to be possibly an expansion city elsewhere? I know a lot of people don't like expansion, but personally I do, and I would love to see another team. So I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts on all of this down in the comment section below. But that's all I'm going to talk about for today. Remember to like this video, and if you really liked it, remember to subscribe down below. We're so close to a subscriber. Thank you for all of your support. I would never be able to do this without you guys, so don't forget to subscribe. I also have a blog talking about news, rumors, analysis, stuff like that, so if you check that out, I'll leave a link down in the description below. And I can't wait to see you guys all for the next video. See you guys soon.